Welcome in, Hawks fans. Your boy Bryce Lewis back at it again for another Believe in Hawks episode. We have a good friend of the show coming back on once again, Glen Willis, one half ATL in 29, coming on, talking some Hawks, obviously, with a lot of storylines that are going into this offseason that are currently evolving right now. Glen, welcome onto the show. How are you, man?
Yeah, I'm good. Enjoying these playoffs. I think the field is a little flatter this year than maybe there is in some other years. So it's creating here in the second round some compelling basketball to watch. So enjoying that a lot. Of course, Hawks fans are on pins and needles to see what happens on draft lottery on Monday and things like that. So it's a fun time of year for sure.
Yeah, man, it's always an active time of year. Good playoffs. You got the draft coming up, like you mentioned. I mean, it's one of those things where basketball never gets dull, even when if your team's not in it anymore, especially in the postseason. But speaking of the Hawks, I want to dive right into this. So obviously the biggest one right now for the Hawks is the president of basketball operations. That has been the big storyline as they fired Landry Fields a few weeks ago. We've heard a lot of different names. We've heard Danny Ferry. We have heard Booth, the former Denver GM. We've heard McNair from San Antonio. And then just yesterday or on Saturday, we heard Trey's agent may be potentially involved. And we've heard that Wrestler is, I guess, warming up, liking the idea of maybe having an agent run the team. So I wanted to get your thoughts on the whole situation. Has there been any name during this process that stuck out to you? Do you have a certain direction that you want them to go in? Because I think some people are kind of like, what the biggest, if they did go the agent route, the biggest person we know right now in the league would be Rob Pelinka, former agent who went and became the GM of the Lakers. People have been very mixed reviews about how his performance has gone so far. So what do you think about the whole just situation with that and the Hawks president?
I mean, I find it interesting. And, they're doing a good job of not kind of putting any reporting out or not letting any kind of leaks get out there, messaging out there on what they're prioritizing, and things like that. And for me, I guess in terms of what I think should be prioritized is a few things. One is I do think in this day and age, we've seen track records where former agents sometimes can marshal bigger deals because they have a little bit more rapport, closer relationships, working history across other agencies and things like that. So that's become a thing. When you look at some of the former leaders like Calvin Booth, et cetera, and you kind of look back at track records, it's sometimes, especially if you don't follow those franchises really closely, there's so much there around ownership context. They authorize to, spend money, to retain a team together. Like in Denver, they lost a couple of key pieces, after the championship run. Bruce Brown, KCP were big contributors there, and financially they decided they weren't going to make the investment to retain those guys. And so when you look at, and just using Calvin Booth as an example there, like how much of that was autonomous decision-making and empowerment that he had or didn't have versus kind of having to work within the financial constraints handed to him by ownership group, and things like that. So, and I look back at, for example, people, talk about Bob Myers of Gold State. I have a hard time knowing like how good or not good is he actually. They were, way over the tax every single year, had that luxury, being in, a great market, to be able to kind of support those kind of financial decisions. So it's a little bit hard for me, but I like innovative thinking. I like seeing a willingness to kind of think outside the box. And I think that could be helpful. And when we look back, at say the last 4 to 5 years, the DeJounte trade, I think we could say, for example, no, I'm not hating on DeJounte, but significantly overpaid, there. And that deal salvaged some of that in the deal to get Dyson and Nance and some picks back from New Orleans. And so when I look back at what Landry and the team did in the last few years, I feel like they've kind of dug out of some bad moves to a certain degree and got them back to a point of some flexibility, some maneuverability. But I would guess that Tony thinks now we need to take a big step. And who is a person that can come in and marshal bigger, more substantial deals to make that happen, has the rapport across the industry, has rapport across other front offices, has worked across the whole league, those sorts of things. And I would hope that that's being the thing that's kind of being prioritized here, because I know we'll get into some roster stuff here in a bit, but Trey needs more offensive juice on this team's, in some form. And I know we'll break that down here a little bit.
Yeah. And the thing too, I think is, when they promoted Ansi Salah to the GM, one thing we kept hearing about him is he was really good with salary cap. That was like his thing. Obviously we may not have questions about, okay, product talent valuation, things like that. I don't know if there's a certain role that they're going to pigeon the guys into, and that's why the decision of president of basketball operations is that big. Obviously, I think they want that to be a good pairing. Obviously, you would like any front office to have a good pairing. There's not like a divided, line within the front office. So I think that will be interesting to kind of see how they approach that. And so, like I said, if it is an agent, maybe like you said, broker deals. That was one thing people criticized Landry about. Was he able to do it? Did he have the cachet in the league to really get certain deals done? And now you bring in a guy whose job is getting deals done potentially. Maybe they feel like that could be a good partnership. So, and I think that leads me to my next question, because it's been about a debate about what direction the Hawks should go in. As you mentioned, could swing. They need offensive juice. Some people have been like, listen, I like the young players, but we got to get a star. You've mentioned Giannis. They've mentioned Zion. They mentioned multiple people. But obviously, you also have to have a plan in place for, okay, if we were going to build around what we have, what would that also look like? Because a lot of people said if you can't get a star, the next big thing would be retooling the bench, trying to fill certain of those needs off the bench. What is your standpoint of what you think the Hawks need to do? I know you mentioned they need a more offensive juice, but do you think that involves, hey, you might have to move one of the guys to do it? Do you think it's something they can still just build through other means? Or like, what does that look like overall?
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of see Hawks fans on social media kind of talk about things that they like to see happen. And I'm never one to want to kind of, look down on that or whatever. Fans get excited about possibilities and things like that and talk it out. For me, Giannis is, there's 29 teams already in line to go figure out what that might cost them, for sure. But then if you look back at what Milwaukee's issues were this year, their issues were that apart from, Dame got older and Dame obviously had some health issues, and, all of us were hoping the best for him in that situation for sure. But when you look at the supporting cast they had there, it wasn't nearly good enough, right? I mean, just not even close to being good enough. And when Dame couldn't play, they didn't really have a point guard. I think Kevin Porter Jr. grew some this year in that role. But with your team that Milwaukee, you got one of the single best players in the whole league. You're wanting more than what a first time full time point guard or full time backup point guard was going to give you. And then for me, I'm trying to figure out, how do the Hawks make an offer to Milwaukee that doesn't just gut their whole roster in the current form? And maybe you say to yourself, players around the league will take cheaper contracts to go play with Giannis and chase it. I mean, maybe that's a thing. Is that a thing? I don't know. Is that a thing for the Hawks? We haven't really seen the history of that in the past, but yeah, maybe Giannis is a needle mover there. So for me, I have a hard time kind of seeing how they make the best offer and still give themselves space to build out the rest of the roster to accomplish what you would hope to accomplish with Giannis. Zion, it's interesting because you hear some of the reporting that they're going to move him. And then you see, I think yesterday it came out he's going to represent them at the draft lottery on Monday. And it's like, whoa, what's going on here? And I made a joke to someone. I was like, is he going to be like the Rob Lowe thing where he wears a hat with an NBA logo on it? That kind of thing. And so, but beyond that, I think you have to kind of look at if the Celtics flame out here in the second round and they played really well yesterday, got some things fixed. Are they going to shake things up? Or is Phoenix going to shake it? And when sometimes for where the Hawks are in their current standing in the league as an organization, being opportunistic sometimes is your best track towards making something happen. A team that feels like, oh man, we didn't accomplish what we hoped to accomplish this year, so let's move a few pieces, and then you jump into a deal, maybe get a player like that. So for me, I have a hard time seeing the Hawks because of they're not super draft asset rich right now, to being a little nice way of saying it. How do they make the best offer for Giannis? I don't see it. But when you see a team that's trying to create space to, let's say, for example, Boston's like, we're going to go get Giannis, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just little things like, could you get Peyton Pritchard from Boston if they need to clear salary to go get Giannis? Some of those things. And I do think you have to kind of think in tiers here. I do think the Hawks need a very high level offensive player to put next to Trey. I think Jalen's still 1 or 2 steps away from being that. He's not quite the shooter he would need to be like a true number 2 yet. And I don't want to say he can't get there. Dude's physical freak and, made so much progress. But if you had him plus another guard or wing that, can handle, pass, distribute, make decisions, be trustworthy with the ball, all those sorts of things, it just takes a lot of pressure off of Trey, who in that template might become available. I don't think we'll know for another 6, 8, 10 weeks. And I think history tells us we're very much impacted by the outcome of these playoff runs by whether it be Boston or, the Knicks or, or whoever it might be. And so I still feel like the Hawks kind of laying in wait and seeking an opportunity to be opportunistic is probably the most likely path for them.
Yeah, and I think too, you mentioned about them being strapped with draft assets. I said my big issue where I think is I don't think the team is at a point where they can make a big move and they still have more left over, if you know what I'm saying. Like Oklahoma City has so many good top players, they can trade 2, 3 guys and still know we have some good guys still ready to go. Especially I've talked about today's CBA and how that's impacted that. Roster construction is even more important than ever before because you can't just luxury tax your way out of it. You get into certain aprons, and that limits how you actually can even build your team. So now, if you have holes, it's like can't really do that much to fix them. And I just feel like that, yes, we can make an argument Tony Ressler should spend more. But at the same time, I think, you don't want to – you can't be top heavy to me in today's league. You may be able to get lucky if you just have one of the best. Like Denver is top heavy, but they are really good at the top. But we know one injury, and then they don't have that much else coming off the bench. So it's one of those things where it's just you have to be lucky in that situation, and it helps that you have one of the best centers in the game, and et cetera, and Jamal Murray. But I think the Hawks are now at a point where they can make a move like that, and then they'll be fine because it's like I think people always look at the positive of like, well, if we get Giannis, like Trey and Giannis, top 3, like best duo in the league. But then it's like, okay, once you get past that, let's say you have to give up Jalen or you have to give up Zach, right? Who are you bringing in to replace these guys? Like, are we trusting the G League guys? Because it's not how much money are you going to have to bring in? You may be able to get signed 1 or 2 maybe good players, and after that, you're like, after the first 5, maybe 6 guys, you have any injuries, you don't really have much after that. And I think that's something I think people don't consider from both ends of the spectrum. And speaking of that, Jalen obviously is coming back from injury. A lot of people, because we haven't seen a full season from him, there's always going to be the questions, okay, is he injury prone, et cetera, et cetera. What you mentioned that you feel like, Jalen's still maybe 1 or 2 steps away from becoming that offensive player. But at the same time, we all saw Jalen is so important for this current version of the team and what they can do and what he brings to the table. Can you just talk about what would you like to see from him next year? Obviously, outside of staying healthy, just in turn, and then also like, is there anything that you felt like when you saw during the season, I really want him to kind of grow on this? Or because I know you mentioned multiple times, like they put him in certain positions to give him reps in that spot, so then he could get more comfortable, like maybe running that point forward position and et cetera, et cetera. So what? Because I think a lot of people are kind of like, if we make a big move for a star, Jalen would be at the centerpiece of that because he's probably a player that people would want. But overall, what do you think for Jalen you want to see from him next year?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like where he was for what he was giving them this year, where he was missed really a lot was defensively, and that has to do with their lack of depth, in the injury situation across power forward and center. Towards the end of the season, Gay was giving them some nice defensive juice. He still has a lot of offensive growth. For me, if Jalen could be a true number 2, right? True number 2, and like I always want to say, I see no reason why he can't get there. I just think he's a couple big steps away from it. Number 1 is his self-creation, creating his own shot. He's I would say like B- there. He's still kind of growing and learning how to do that. What spots does he prefer to get to on the floor? What moves does he feel like he's most comfortable with kind of really leaning into, when he has a younger or smaller defender on him or what have you. And then the other piece is to be that, I mean, you have to be a pretty high level shooter, jump shooter. And he's not that yet, And so those are the big things for me. Like in transition, forget it. Like he's one of the single best guys in the league there. Whether he's finishing, pushing the ball himself, making the pass, all those sorts of things. But where he has to become a higher become deserving of investment of more usage in the half court, it's just reps, reading the floor more naturally. As the Hawks lean into him running some pick and roll and say things like that, teams would, saw his rawness there. This is the first year he really got a pretty good dose of that before he got hurt. And they just like a lot of young players getting tricked into thinking he's seeing one thing and actually there's something else going on there. Jumping passing lanes, hiding the defender that's low on the other side of the floor, all that sort of stuff. And Jalen has, I think, great natural feel with the basketball in his hands. I think there's a ton to build on there. He just needs repetitions and opportunities. But the one thing I always like to say, I work in technology and cybersecurity. My educational background's in psychology. And I feel like one thing fans kind of miss on sometimes is that they want a player to be a human being that they're not. And every player brings their personality and their natural makeup and their biology to their person on the court, right? I wonder if there's something the Hawks can do to get Jalen to click and just play with more force. I think that's another really, really big step. We've seen last year at times finessing finishes that he didn't need to finesse, right? And just being able to recognize like, oh, there's a 6'3" guy in front of the rim. He can't keep me off the rim. I'm just going to go, be very assertive and physical and play with force there. Because I think his natural instinct is to lean a little bit more into finesse, and there are times that makes sense. Brooke Lopez is sitting right in front of the rim. Maybe I get to a 12-foot pull up, or whatever it might be. Other times when the defense got disorganized and there's a guard sitting in the paint. And so it's that decision making and that processing of when he can, because he has so much athleticism and physicality that's there that I feel like he doesn't really tap that often. And to me, those are the big steps: is self-creation, jump shooting, and maybe the biggest of them all is how to really lean into all of his athletic skills and gifts and play with a lot more force. I think that's what that last one I think is the one that stands between him, what he is now, and being an all-star level player.
Yeah, and I agree with that assessment. I think Jalen is a guy who, when he gets downhill, he is a hard player to stop. And I think that's why when he kind of burst onto the scene for the Hawks, a lot of people were trying to figure out, okay, what exactly is this guy ceiling? What can he be? Because it feels like he jumps off. To me, I say he's one of those players where if you're not a basketball fan, you're a casual watcher of basketball, but you watch the Hawks, I feel like you could point out Jalen and say he looks like he should be a good player. Like he gives off that energy. And I think that, a guy who averages 20, 10, and 5, because his rebounding is underrated. He averaged 10 rebounds a game. He's really good at that too. I think he's a guy who I think it's one of those things where I think reason why they're so divided on what the Hawks should do is just a matter of, do you believe Jalen can get to that next step, as we've talked about? And if people feel like if he's not, or if you don't, then you need to move him for someone who is. And yet at the same time, the argument for keeping him would be stability, comfort, just like, because, he pretty much, for most part, Trey and Jalen seem to work. Where if you bring in another guy, there's no guarantee of that. Like if you bring in Giannis, Jalen and Giannis kind of play a little different, and so that could change how they want to operate. And then we'll have to see how that works in the grand scheme of things. But I think Jalen definitely, if he could stay healthy, sets himself up. Because we see workout. He works on his game. He gets better. He tries to get better. So we know he's going to put in the work, and then we'll see what the fruits of those labors look like when they get into the season. But so, going from Jalen to the bench now, we made, obviously at the trade deadline, we made the trade. We acquired Terrence Mann, George Niang, and Karis LeVert. I feel like out of the three, a lot of people, just in terms of what the Hawks need, we feel like, okay, I would like to see Karis back, just because he is one of the guys who can create a shot. Obviously we know it's the Karis train. He'll give you nothing one night and he'll give you 30 the next. It's just part of who he is. But he is capable of doing it. And, I know Terrence Mann is a very, interesting name to Hawks fans. Some moments I've said that he'll be a reason why we're down 10, but he's also sometimes the reason why we're able to get back into a game. And then George Niang, obviously, it's easy, to pick on him, I always like to say. We know that he isn't the most athletic guy. He's not the best defender in the world, but he's smart. He could shoot. And we saw in a big playoff game, he stepped up. So with the three guys from this past season, first, do you want all three of them to return? And second, what do you see for them all? Because I've said that the Hawks need more out of them for them to be competitive than probably what you would like to ask them to do. And hope when obviously when Jalen comes back, that will reduce some of that and then whatever moves they make. But overall, what do you think about those three guys? Do you like to see all of them return? And yeah, so
yeah, I think Karras fits almost everything that they do on both ends of the court. And this is the big asterisk with all of these guys, right? It's like when his role is optimized, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, with their injury situation, I mean, Man was defensively playing power forward half the minutes down the last month, right? And we'll talk about Man in a second, but Karras, a couple things. One is he's not the point of attack defender he was, say, 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Get a little older, right? He's a totally professional defender, like completely professional defender, but you know, not the first guy I'd want to put on the other team's best ball handler at this point in his career. The self-creation is what the Hawks were lacking before they got him. You know, for as good as Hunter was before the trade happened, you know, making sure, I mean, he carried that second unit offense for the first month and a half of the season. But as soon as Jalen goes down, he's dealing with power forwards defending him instead of, you know, and it completely changed everything, you know, for him. Which made it a lot harder. And he was never going to be a self-creator, you know. I mean, he got better about you know, attacking the paint and driving a little more and things like that. But I think Karras' ability to get to mid-range, pull up, being a reliable shooter, kind of in that area, late shot clock, he has the skills to kind of create some decent shot for him. And that's something I think they have to have more of on this roster. So I think he's a priority to bring back if they can make that happen. When it comes to Terrence Mann, I wrote the season review on him for Peachtree Hoops, and one of the things I emphasize there is that from a cultural fit, he is a perfect culture, selfless team guy. Whatever assignment you give him, he takes it, does his best with it. Leans into it, even if it's not like, you know, he's out there trying to defend Giannis, you know, in that last game against the Bucks, you know. And so as you know, a guy, you know, who's coached youth, you know, in my background and things like that, like always love, yeah, I'll take it. Yeah, I'll take that assignment. Yeah, I'll take that assignment. And you appreciate that. We all saw where it was a bigger adjustment for him offensively than for others, right?
Mm-hmm.
The 0.5 that they always talk about, he had a hard time with that. And that doesn't surprise me because in LA, he basically sat in the weak side corner. You know, I joked on ATL 29 that he just lived it up in the weak side corner the whole time he was on the floor in LA. So it doesn't surprise me. But the dude is a hard worker. He's smart. And he'll have a whole offseason to kind of work with the Hawks coaches on what it takes for him to kind of become a better fit offensively. But when you talk about him and Niang, you know, Man has what, I can't remember, it's 3 more years on that deal, I think. Yep. And Niang has 1 more year, for a really affordable deal at 8.2. If you can go swing those 2 guys into a trade, even if you have to give up one or two of the picks this year, I don't think there's anything that is precious about Nan or Niang to the point that you don't think about putting them in a deal that makes you a lot better, that brings back a high-level player back, you know. But at the same time, all 3 of those guys, I think one of the reasons they pulled the trigger on all those deals is that all 3 of them are pros. All 3 of them are team guys. All 3 of them will serve in the role you ask them to serve in, and will just do the work and do their job. And that's what that identity and that culture is what the Hawks are really trying to emphasize. It's one of the reasons I think they took Ricochet. Ricochet will do what's asked of him. Will you do what's asked of you? Will you do what's asked of you? From that vantage point, I have no heartburn if they bring all 3 back. You know, none at all. I think Niang has to be a guy that sometimes he doesn't play. You know, you're up against a team that plays really fast. You're playing the Pacers, who's run up and down the court. Niang may not be able to play more than, say, 8 minutes, you know, in a game like that, and just, you know, be a sub like that. And so for me, I'm fine from the cultural standpoint. What I'm more interested in is those 3 guys being on your second unit, Karras being a guy that closes games for you, but plays the second thing, helps you close games when that's the right fit. But that's where you look at Do they start Trey, Dyson, Zach, Jalen, and Yucca next year, and those 3 guys are on the bench, so now you're 8 deep? Where is that big upgrade come? Do you make an upgrade that slides Zach to the second unit? Do you go get a small, where does that come from? And so for me, it's really interesting to kind of think about that. But I thought the trades were fine. I thought they overpaid for man. I thought throwing the draft picks in from the Hawks side didn't make a lot of sense. But I thought they had, I don't know, just reading tea leaves, it seemed like they had gotten to a point with Bogey where they almost couldn't bring him back. And so had to probably just kind of make the best deal that was out there. But generally speaking, I like what those 3 kind of give the team. But I think Karras is really important to bring back. I think Niang and Man are totally fine to put in a trade if you find something that really is a significant upgrade.
Yeah, and I think too, I've mentioned like if I was going to make a move, I would probably look at the Lakers pick, in the 20s, and maybe try to pair him with one of those guys and see if that's something that you can, like I said, make a move for, get a bench upgrade on. Because like I said, I think a lot of people, like I said, we have discussions about should the team run it back, should the team, make a swing, things like that. And I think that could also be part of it, just as not as a big major move, but one of the smaller moves that can help fill out your team, and get your team where they need to be. So I think that, like I said, they all bring something to the table. I've always said Karras is kind of like a guy who's like, I really like him back just because, unless you feel like you're going to get other guys who can do that. I think that would be really good for the team as they, continue to move forward. So, no, when you mentioned it about, Niang sometimes not playing, I think backup 4 once again is a question. And I think the question for people is like, all right, do the Hawks, after what they saw last year with Mo Gay, do they say, listen, Mo Gay, you're backing up Jalen? From a defensive standpoint, it's ideal size. If you get with rim protection, it would fit, especially if you do add another rim protecting center. Now you're like, okay, we got 2 rim protectors coming off the bench. So you would think that would be ideal. Biggest thing with Gay is his offense. Will his offense come along? That's going to be the big thing. And then, like I said, even when Jalen plays next year, nobody really plays 82 anymore. So he's not going to play all 82 more than likely. So there's going to be games where you're going to need him to start. And then I've made an argument, maybe that's why you keep Niang, just to kind of have, as if he was like your third power forward, quote unquote, that's not bad. Like I think that would work. It's just, it just depends. Do you think the Hawks will go in the direction where, like, listen, he just started for us, let's just make him the backup? Or do you think they do need to explore an upgrade? Or is it maybe you think Niang should be the backup 4 until proven otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, so it's so hard for me to know, like, how do they feel like they could help him really grow offensively over this offseason? Because as you nailed it, like, that's the big thing is, can he function? Can he 0.5 on the catch? Can he, can he do those things? Another thing is he hasn't really figured out how to really, he's fast and has a lot of verticality. That stuff should really pop in transition, and it hasn't, to this point a lot. And he's got to, I think that's an area where even if he's, neutral, has neutral value at the offensive half court, if he's contributing in transition regularly, that helps you feel better about leading into more minutes for him, And I think the value for Niang, if they bring him back, is every NBA coach, when their team is down, say 8, 10, 12 points, midway through the fourth quarter, they want to juice their lineup with shooting. And you can't just say, okay, we got to put our best shooting lineup on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you try to probably survive some of the defense, issues that Niang kind of offers, and just really trying to juice as much shooting to the lineup as you can. And I think that it's so funny for me. And again, I don't say this in a condescending way at all, but when the Hawks were losing down the stretch, everyone was hammering Quinn for his quote rotations. And it's like, what did you want him to do? Who else did you want him to play? So it's kind of interesting to me. But for me, when you look around the league at the way that teams will oftentimes construct their roster to support a guy like Mo Gay getting more opportunity next year, is you'll go find a veteran player, like a really experienced veteran player towards the tail end of his career. And if Mo Gay is having a young guy, tough game, having a hard time to click, you can turn to that guy and say, okay, Mo doesn't have it today, 34-year-old backup, power forward who just knows how to go out and do all the baseline basic things. And you have that available. You kind of look around the league and, and Knicks had Landry Shamet they could throw out there when somebody was hurt, right? And Landry Shamet, and I'm a big fan of his. I love those guys who will not play for a month and then go play for 8 straight games and go back to the bench when they're healthy, when the other guy is healthy again. And that's what the Hawks, what really kept them from getting to 6 or 5 this year was that when they had injuries, they were playing young, inexperienced guys, right? Where other teams that were built for a little bit more maneuverability could say, well, we can give our young guys some run, but if it's not going well, I have a veteran I can turn to that will go out and just do the kind of baseline stuff. The Hawks had none of that, especially once Nance went down and Capella went down, Jalen went down. They were playing, Dom Barlow at backup center in critical games. And I think Dom has a future in the league, but he was not ready for that, this season. And so for me, I think, if it goes Jalen, Mo, and then a veteran guy, who can kind of be that other guy that doesn't really have to play ever, except when maybe Mo's struggling, that's the roster construction that a lot of teams try to use to put around young guys who are trying to develop. And the Hawks didn't really have that this year.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, I think for obvious reasons, front court defensively, that would be good. Obviously, Gay can help you there. It's just one of those things, like you said, do they feel like he can take enough growth offensively? Whether that is hitting the three, whether that is being stronger with the ball. Obviously, he's still even, developing his body. That's part of the process as well. So I think that Gay has, I think a lot of people are like excited about him and they want to see him play just because they look at what they think he can bring. And I think that's why there's always the conversation about it. But like I said, we don't know what the Hawks think in terms of like, do we want to trust him with that role? And if they're not comfortable or they rather keep him in like a third guy off the bench role, they may need to find a guy who can obviously, replace that position.